Before we begin, if you're working in services and want to strengthen your understanding of ketamine use and how to embed it into practice, free professional resources are available at our website. We also offer specialist training and consultancy services. Please contact us for details. We also offer an evidence-informed e-learning course focused on ketamine awareness. All links are in the episode description. This series discusses ketamine use, physical and mental health impact, dependency, medical complications, and related harms.
Some interviews include people sharing lived experience or personal loss.
If anything we discuss feels overwhelming, please pause and access support. Information is available in the podcast description.
If you're listening with children or in a shared space, please consider that before continuing.
Hello and welcome to Frontline. My name is David Gill.
And I'm Andrew James.
And in our second episode, we are going to be exploring the impact of ketamine. In our first episode, we explored the current situation, how ketamine has shifted and changed over the last couple of years. And in this episode, we really wanted to consider the impact that it can have on people, from the impact of people who may be using it recreationally, who may need that harm reduction advice. But we also wanted to spend a bit of time really think about the impact on those that can have some quite serious impacts. In this episode, we are going to be hearing from people who've used and family members who have gone through very difficult times from other people's ketamine use as well. So this episode, Andrew, we are talking about the impacts. And from your perspective then, what sort of areas do you think we should focus on as a society when responding to ketamine?
I think this is going to be a little extension of what we said in the introduction to episode 1, where we talked about perhaps media sensationalization, lots of talk about prohibition. Another general facet of that is to essentially attempt to dehumanize people who use substances. And it's a common theme. Practically everyone knows slang terms, derogatory ones at that, for people who use various drugs. And it is designed, I would assume, to have a dehumanizing impact. But something we need to remember is, no matter what, these are human beings. And there is a human cost to these situations. And especially dehumanizing people, denying them the dignity or the seemingly the ability to access help when it's needed, or to simply serve to punish people for life choices that ultimately aren't harmful to other people around them, if that is indeed the case. But I think that's the one thing that we do need to remember, and one thing that I really do think we've been able to do in this episode is really look at real life case studies for people in these situations, to try and put a real human face and real human voice to these situations and these people.
Yeah, I guess from my point of view, this episode is important to talk about the impact and really look at that from a sort of a wide spectrum, because we are, of course, going to be talking about the impact it can have. And the most serious impact from ketamine use is, unfortunately, that you can potentially die from it, both in terms of what you use, how you use it. But for a lot of people, it's the prolonged impact of ketamine use, used day in, day out, and can cause some serious harms for a lot of people. But I wanted to balance this out. Again, a big part of this approach that we're looking at here is the balance. And when we're talking about the impact, so much of the wonderful impact services are having with people is in the communities, festivals, clubbing nights, when they're dishing out really, really accurate, safe harm reduction advice that reminds them that, you know, using ketamine recreationally with their friends you can use it in a safer, there's no such thing as a safe way of using any drug, but a safe way to keep you as safe as possible. And that at least starts the conversations off and normalizes, and it gets it out in the community. And the community aspect is so important because, again, we're talking about the impact that this can have on families and within sort of GPs, within school systems, education systems, people who are in jobs. And because of one thing we know about ketamine is you can use it and it can be hidden. There's not the obvious telltale signs that you see with a lot of other drugs. So a lot of jobs, employers now are having to think about their response to this. So it is a bit of a ripple effect of who it may be helping. As you mentioned, the derogatory terms, the stigma can stop people from going to their GP, or their GP could turn around and use quite stigmatizing language about certain things which can hold them back. And also, when we're thinking about the impact, we have to put it in context with the modern world. And a lot of people are now buying drugs online, not through the dark web, but just using WhatsApp or social media and getting it delivered to their door. So this rethinking that a person's bedroom when you were a young person used to be a safe place for you to sort of go to has now become a risk area where you can go on, get things delivered to your door. And ketamine also becomes very dangerous when you use on your own, for example, in your bedroom. So it is, again, rethinking what we mean by the impact. So it's not just sort of at one extreme to the other. We're looking at all the nuance and detail in between. And that's exactly what we are going to be looking at in today's episode when we think about the impact.
Some of the most common impacts we see include severe bladder pain, urinary complications, and physical deterioration. Long-term heavy use can lead to hospitalisation, and in some cases, irreversible damage. Mental health often deteriorates alongside physical harm. Dependency can become intertwined with attempts to manage emotional pain.
Relationships frequently become strained. Families may notice changes but not always understand what's happening. By the time support is sought, harm has often already accumulated.
Between 2014 and 2023, 244 deaths in England and Wales mention ketamine on death certificates. In 2024, 60 registered deaths involved ketamine. That same year, 197 deaths recorded the detection of ketamine, though not necessarily as the primary cause.
It's also important to note that 1,192 drug poisoning deaths in 2024 had no specific drug type recorded. Official data emphasises that substance attribution is complex. Many deaths involving ketamine may be recorded under complications, accidents, or broader drug toxicity. The reality is simple. We don't know exactly how many deaths involve ketamine directly.
My name's Natalie, and unfortunately I lost my daughter. Her name was Bethany, to a substance called ketamine. It was a secret addiction that she'd hidden from all her family, most of her friends, and by the time she wanted help, she only survived another 6 weeks. And since then, I've just turned my pain into purpose. Well, with Beth's story in particular, it's quite complicated because she lost her son through preeclampsia. So her kidneys were impacted by that. And she was using for 6 years. And throughout that time, because she wasn't honest about her addiction, everything that they were looking for was to do with maybe damage caused by the preeclampsia. She was only actually honest with me on her last hospital admission, which was the 8th of September 2024. But by that time, you know, her health was rapidly failing, and she'd lost lots of weight, and she couldn't hide it anymore, and she needed help. And unfortunately, 6 weeks later, she was gone. So she, after the loss of her son, she was using it recreationally, and I didn't know until after her death that she'd first tried it when she was 14, which is a very common thread that we see through a lot of ketamine users. They do start quite young and recreationally. And she'd obviously known by that point that ketamine can just take away and numb everything. So with the loss of her son, she'd said that she'd started using more. I thought that she was coping so well after she lost him. And I was in awe of how quickly she bounced back. And in my eyes, I was like, she was like a superwoman. But little did I know that's the appeal of ketamine. It takes all this emotional pain away. And within time, obviously, her usage had increased as hospital admissions increased, the loss of a job. And then obviously the last 18 months of her life was probably the heaviest that she was using. She told me it was £60 a day, but after speaking to so many people in recovery, I think it would probably be a bit more than that. A lot of what I'm finding out is being after a death as well, where I pieced all the parts together. Unfortunately, there's a lot of answers I'll never get from her. So when she was describing all these hospital admissions, her symptoms, we as a family and a doctors are still under the impression that it's due to the preeclampsia. So they're looking, and this is 12 months ago. I don't think it was as prevalent as, knowing the signs for K bladder. So she was going in for all these appointments, the chronic pain. But when she told me that she was passing chunks of flesh 2 years ago, it's now knowing that would have been the lining of a bladder shedding. And I've only found that out by talking to people in recovery. So I know for that, she would have been using a lot more than what I assumed. And then with the loss of a job, she got a payout. So, and I know that would have funded a large portion. I've spoken to people who that she used with. There's people that were in a friend group that are literally on death's door right now, fighting for their lives, but still heavy in addiction and not being able to get out of it. I think a few of her friends knew that she was using ketamine as a hair party drug, but I don't think they realised to the extent, because I know she was getting it dropped off while she was in bed, and a dealer would put it through the letterbox and she'd pay via bank. So there was no going out. It was going, collecting the ketamine, going up in bed and K-holing to not just numb, by this point, emotional pain. It would have been excruciating physical pain, and not, unfortunately, because of all these hospital visits, she was also prescribed morphine or a morph regularly. So she was opioid and a ketamine addict, and which again this is a common thread that we're seeing with lots of people, because it's like the services don't know how to handle the pain management or even just understand what's going on with them internally and mentally regarding this substance. So she'd lost so much weight. Before she was honest about her addiction, I'd confronted her and asked her if she had an eating disorder, because there was no other logical explanation for this rapid weight loss in my mind. And I thought maybe, she was really struggling, because not only did she lose her son, she'd lost her uncle a year prior. And then, it wasn't even a year, probably 6 months prior to losing her son, and then a granddad a couple of years later. And again, the traumas, they just end up using more and more. So she'd lost a lot of weight, had so much pain, but at the time of her death, the autopsy unfortunately couldn't determine a cause of death. But what they did say was the damage to her bladder was completely collapsed. So she would be facing a bladder removal. She was completely incontinent. She was in adult diapers. She was so weak she could hardly eat, which we know is the gallbladder and catgut, everything that was going on inside the pelvic region. She also had a perforated lung from they suspect from vomiting and wrenching, which, you know, it all links up because ketamine doesn't just affect the bladder, it's infecting the whole entire body. Her septum was defective. Although she still looked beautiful up here, she didn't, no one knew about, you know, how to look after and harm reduction, you know, swilling and cleaning the nose. So that would have been left there. So up here was perforated, and then obviously when she passed, that was the first thing that went, was her nose. When we saw her in the I was the last one to see her at the funeral home, and her friend was hoping to see her one last time. He travelled all the way back from Australia, but unfortunately that wasn't possible. The damage was too bad.
Statistics feel distant. Stories feel personal. Behind every number is someone's child, partner, family member, or friend.
Loss linked to substance use often follows long periods of struggle. It raises difficult questions. Were warning signs missed? Could earlier intervention have changed the outcome? Are support systems accessible enough?
Impact is not only personal. Emergency departments continue to see ketamine-related complications. Drug services report increasing complexity, especially where ketamine is used alongside other substances.
Key system questions remain. Are pathways clear? Are referrals fast enough? Is there integration between mental health services, addiction treatment and physical healthcare? These structural issues directly influence outcomes.
This is Joe from the Birchwood.
I worked with parents who have lost their children, and they are concerned as well about the coroner reporting because it's not a true reflection. And obviously the time that it takes for coroners to also report is so lengthy that actually our data is so outdated by the time we've got it. I don't think the coroners have a full understanding around the harms that it has to the body. You know, somebody that's having ketamine daily and then they start to lose weight, this low BMI, then, you know, directly affecting their multi-organ failure and directly affecting their cardiac function, that we just see people that are so poorly that can't actually fight basic infections, you know, systemic infections like a UTI become sepsis. So we've got people who will present to us with suicide ideation and self-harm that's escalating, that paranoia. And they do need to be in a safe environment and have that kind of psychological support. But we're also seeing people who have already started to break down within their bodies. So people's lining of the bladder has gone. They're unable to sort of be at home without some intervention of nutritional support, frequent blood work that needs high monitoring levels. So it might be every couple of days they have bloods taken, or they need them reducing to once a week. So people that will not be able to stay at home and look after themselves, and actually they need a rest. They almost need to come into a non-using environment to have a break. Because they're unable to reduce at home. And that's somebody that is using, you know, sort of 3 to 20 grams a day that we see. I mean, that's a huge amount to be using. But yeah, along with the mental health, but also people that have got the deranged liver function tests, their kidneys are impaired, people with sort of, you know, cardiac issues that are related as well. So those are the sort of set things that we're looking at. And neuropathic pain, that horrendous pain that we see people sort of screaming and crippled with that, you know, that use that doesn't kind of get better for maybe 2 weeks. So they're just not going to be able to be at home at that point, because the only thing at that time that will help them is the ketamine for the pain. So that's why we're sort of saying that early intervention into allowing them to have the medication to help the bladder, to help the nerve pain, and to help their, you know, general pain and discomfort is really important, but not all areas are doing that. Well, I mean, we see lots of people that have accessed A&E and sat there for 12 hours in discomfort, and hospitals have had some limited information. That has started to improve around the ketamine, but I would say that there needs to be clear signposting within primary care, GPs, A&Es, to be able to say that there needs to be a referral directly. And that can be the same with the ambulance service. There needs to be a quick access and referral process to get those people on board with the drug and alcohol services, because they're key to this, aren't they? We can't deal with the pressures in A&E, and actually it's not the right environment. It's a quick turnaround, out you go, there's some codeine, off you pop. But actually we're not getting to the root cause for that support for that individual. It's a shame that there can't be a national stance on the training as a strategy for GPs and acute healthcare settings to have that training as standard. But also, when you look at the prescribing element, so when we look at some of the community services, looking at this prescribing as a harm reduction technique, that should then be given to the GPs. So I know that's one service that we work closely with. They are telling the GPs, this is what we advise that should be prescribed in the community for anybody presenting with ketamine or, ketamine cystitis, entrenched use, and they will follow that. You would hope that that could be rolled out throughout the country, but it's not at the moment. So I know that more research will be needed. I think that we're all still, although we've known about this since around 2021, this small sort of escalation trickling through, but to then have sort of 5,300%, which we're at the moment, of an increase since 2021 in inpatient rehab and detox placements. We've had the last 12 months known that this has escalated significantly. So actually, if we put a plan in place, we hope that over the next 24 months, that anybody being able to go to the GP about ketamine use will have normalised conversations and will have a prescribing regime set for them. But that needs to be a national response rather than everybody doing their own thing.
We caught up with Alex and Amy from the River Drug Service in Liverpool.
It's that detrimental to your physical health. It then goes into your mental health then, because you're so thin, you're so frail, you're in so much pain. Then you don't want to get up of a morning. You start to have suicidal thoughts, or sometimes people are sadly enough to take action, and it becomes a real life thing. So I think, the complex thing is the fact of your physical health, how quick it deteriorates. Previously, when someone's health was deteriorating and it was one of our very first ketamine clients, we didn't know who to turn to, didn't know what to do. So now essentially when you're referred to CGL River, what happens is you're given a health assessment with our GP or one of our nurses, and they go through a comprehensive ketamine assessment, and then you as a key worker, you hear your client at MDT with our GP, with the nurses, and then basically what happens is our GP will link in with the young person's GP and email them and basically recommend what they think will help this young people. Now, previous to us setting that up, that was unheard of. So we had young people who were in chronic pain. They were, wetting themselves. They couldn't get out of bed. And we just didn't know what to do with them. We were sending them to the hospital. They were given antibiotics for a water infection, sent away. They were given paracetamol. Now, if you're using an anaesthetic, paracetamol is not going to touch the sides. Where now we have got a list of medication, which is it's non-opiate, so it's non-addictive, because obviously you run the risk of someone then becoming addicted to opiates on top of ketamine. So Dr. Ray, our amazing doctor, has come up with a list of medication which he recommends, but that also allows young people to detox at home as well, because essentially it's pretty much the same medication as what you'd be provided with in detox for the pain management. So complex towards complex, that's not essentially everyone. Sometimes people do have complex lives. In the case of, a lot of it can be county lines, sexual abuse as well, is a massive one, because I think essentially, you know, if you're taking this substance, that's detaching you from self, and you need that substance. Essentially, sometimes you're going to do anything to get it. So I think that is like the sexual side of it, sexual exploitation has been a massive pull factor, especially for girls as well. Um, and then obviously drug dealing and county lines, a lot of young people will start selling the drug and then end up using it because it's so readily available and it's around them all the time. That's what everyone else is doing. End up getting addicted to it, and then essentially they're working off what they're having. So they're constantly chasing the tail. And then obviously that comes with, like, you know, people turning up to the houses and all the rest of it. So I think the complexities is like any other drugs, like ACEs, trauma, anything like that. But the main complex now is your physical health and how unwell it makes you. You know, it's even like down to like prolapse bowels. We've had young people who have went into cardiac arrest because they've been so thin and frail that the body's given up.
But we have clinics as well, multimodal clinics, where they can be checked for the renal, for the liver. So we do all that in-house, but that's how we make sure everyone's signposted to the correct department to identify this substance and the harms it's having on the body. Because we are a young people's service, we are constantly like trying to be innovative and change our ways for, you know, upskilling staff and discussing with young people. So that's what we are constantly doing, like getting that message out and make sure we're tailoring it to suit that audience, because our audience is so tricky. They've got no dependence. They are in the early stages of their substance misuse. So for us to tackle them, to tell them to stop using, like, it's so tricky. So we have to make sure that we are, you know, effectively supporting them, but adjusting our way for our delivery and our approach to supporting them as well.
And I think essentially it's the families as well. You know, families who have never come across addiction, and then they've got you know, a young person on their like in their care and they're in addiction to ketamine. Like, it's so sad as well because they just don't understand. So it's about coming around that, and like we've made parents guides, there's parents groups what they can attend, the lifeboat where, you know, parents can all join a Zoom call, so then they're not isolated and they feel like they're not enabling them as well. I think because a lot of the time it's really hard, you know, if you've got maybe a young person who is quite a little bit of a handful and, you know, is pressuring you into giving them money. If you don't give me money, blackmail and all that, and then parents end up cracking and they're like, oh, and give them it. Or, you know, say for instance, if a young person's in that much pain and the parents don't know what to do and you just give them money to go and get ketamine, knowing that it's an anaesthetic and it's going to stop the pain. But then the parents feel like they're enabling them. So then the parents have got to live with that. Because a lot of the time as well, like, you know, I'll have parents on the phone and they're like, my son or daughter's going to die and I don't know what to do. And like, they're distraught, which rightly so. But I think that has been a massive, massive barrier for us. I've had young people on my caseload who are speaking to older men, you know, getting money from older men, sending it to the drug dealer and getting the drugs delivered to the house. Like, it's so easily done. And I think even down to the fact of people who like will join groups and like QR codes which like are on the street, you scan them, gives you a drug dealer's number. Like, that's not heard of for the parents who like are older and stuff like that. That's never a thing. So I think the digital world and phones and the internet is a massive problem, especially with ketamine, because it's so easily accessible. You only literally have to send one text or one phone call and it could be there arriving within 5 minutes, 10 minutes maximum.
This is Mikey sharing his recovery journey.
I tried to hide it. Obviously, with an addiction, you try to hide it. You don't want your mum to know. I lived at home I've got 7 family members who live with me at home, and I didn't want any of them to know. But when you're constantly coming downstairs saying you've got Pappy and asking for a hot water bottle, or sitting in a bath every day when you don't normally get baths, just to try and take away this pain, because heat would be the only thing that would take your pain away. So no one was there to kind of encourage me. You know, my mates, it's a tricky one with them because they didn't know how bad it was. No one knew that, you know, a couple of years back what it could do to you. So And none of them, like close mates who I was with, were as bad as me. So they just look at it as, oh, that's disgusting. Well, stop sniffing, just stop. So there was no one to kind of guide me. I feel like I had to guide myself to go. And when I went to see my doctor, and by the time I'd been about all the pains and stuff like that, I opened up to him and I broke down to him about the ketamine use. And that was the first time I broke down to a professional. And he then referred me to the drug and alcohol place. Even after that, it took me another 2 months, 3 months to even call them and make that first initial call to get help. But when it comes down to the professionals during all that time of, experiencing that pain and suffering in pain and suffering in silence, there was no professional that could help at the time, medically wise. So, your hospitals or doctors, they didn't have a clue. I must have done over 20 to 30 hospital trips during that time. And you'd sit there for 15, 16 hours and then get sent home with codeine because they didn't know about ketamine on multiple occasions. When someone is that desperate for help and they're in that much pain and they're suffering and they just want help. But when I was in the hospital, they'd start typing it in. When they're asking me questions, they'd start typing in, what is ketamine? What can ketamine do to your body? They didn't have a clue. So at that point, you just feel completely lost.
This is Lisa from CGL.
I've also noticed through social media, when thinking about parents, there's a lot of support groups out there, but there's so much more as a parent. As we say, kids don't come with like a guidebook, do they? And I think there's a lot more information that needs to go out there because it's not like in the old days where there might be more obvious symptoms around how somebody might be using. And I have heard various parents talk about where they didn't realise that their kids were using ketamine because they were in their bedroom all the time. But then I've heard parents talk about that they found adult nappies in wardrobes where their child was concealing the impact of the ketamine use was having on them. So we assume, as you say, that your kids are safe because they're at home in the bedroom. But when you think of something like ketamine, when it gets quite chronic use, people can't get out the house anyway. So they'll be at home just constantly using. And as a parent, sometimes it's a no-go area, your kid's bedroom. They don't want you in there, so you don't know what's going on.
This is Lauren from CGL 1625 Outreach and Lydia, the CEO from the Bristol Drug Project.
But I think when you see this sort of shift, I think particularly kind of around young people and young adults and how they talk about ketamine use, and even when you look at some of the kind of statistics, I mean, particularly around kind of student use, you see, roughly around 25% of students disclose having used ketamine in the last 12 months. So there is quite a significant shift in use. But I think what comes with that is we're all talking more about ketamine as well, which I think has a really good positive impact. We're here in this space now, being able to talk about ketamine. I think availability has played a really big part in these conversations, certainly from my perspective. I think that ketamine availability we know is quite high at the moment and has been for a while, and the cost and affordability, like particularly when we're talking about young people, and when I'm referencing young people, I'm thinking perhaps those under sort of 25 in that type of age range. Like it's hard out there, like generally speaking, financially, and I think that that's an attractive feature, being able to kind of get hold of something that is relatively cheap. And even if you're looking at comparisons like against costs of alcohol, I don't know if it's the same for you guys, Lydia, in terms of the conversations that you have, but like ketamine can be a much cheaper night out than drinking.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely, and that does play a role for people. I also have like a completely unsubstantiated theory that is interesting to see the growth of ketamine use, particularly for social anxiety, for young people that were really at a critical point in their development in COVID lockdowns. And that it doesn't feel, when you speak with people around their ketamine use, the narratives around like social anxiety, struggling to go on a night out, struggling to connect with people, all of those things. And a lot of people notice their ketamine use going up in lockdowns, or it being something that they use as a party drug, and then like it actually fitted something around their mental health, trauma, and I think that is a really kind of under-researched area about understanding, like the unexpected things that it does for young people, and maybe like it would be more helpful for us to understand some of the like structural and like systemic and societal reasons for why ketamine use is going up amongst young people, rather than just it being just about the substance. It's kind of about like what need does this meet, and some of it is about the cost of living, some of it is about money, some of it is about being neurodivergent and how long it takes to get a diagnosis, and support around that. ADHD medications being really, really hard to get hold of at points, and things like that, when ketamine can play a role in helping people to manage sensory overload, helping people to manage differences in social communication and social styles. And I think like that kind of wider view of what young people may like about ketamine, what it may do for them, is like a really fruitful thing for us to explore and understand, because that's also how we can develop alternative coping strategies, look at what needs aren't being met, develop our services to meet those needs, rather than just kind of focusing purely on, the substance itself.
So that was episode 2, The Impact. Please join us again for episode 3, the final part in this series, called What Comes Next. Until then, I've been Andrew James.
And I've been David Gill.
And we've been Frontline.